Her son and daughter-in-law threw her out into the basement, thinking she would put up with it. But a month later, they were looking for a new place to live. Subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're from. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of Loretta James's small apartment for the last time. The light, soft and hesitant, crept across the worn linoleum floor, brushed against the chipped edges of the wooden dresser, and came to rest gently on the modest suitcase propped beside her chair. She had packed it the night before, folding each garment with care, pressing her hands against the familiar fabrics as though she could hold on to the years that had passed. There were no tears, only a quiet solemnity, the kind that settles into the bones of a woman who has learned to hold her emotions close, like secrets. Loretta was 69 years old and had spent every day of her adult life working, first as a cleaner in the homes of the affluent, then as a cafeteria cook, and later as a home health aide. She had labored through long days and aching nights with one singular goal: to provide her son Jason with a life better than the one she had known. She had raised him alone after her husband died in a construction accident when Jason was just 3. Since then, she had never remarried. There had been no time, no space for personal dreams. Her world revolved around Jason, his schooling, his health, his future. Now, as she sat in the dim apartment she had rented for nearly 2 decades, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation stirred in her chest. Today, she would be moving in with Jason and his wife, Ashley. The thought brought a cautious smile to her face. Jason had always been a good boy, smart, respectful, kind. He had graduated from college, landed a job in software development, and just 2 years ago married a bright young woman from a well-to-do family. Ashley was tall and poised, always perfectly put together, with a voice like polished marble, smooth and cool. Loretta didn't know her well, but she tried not to let that worry her. After all, Ashley had insisted that it was time for Loretta to live with them. "It only makes sense," Ashley had said during a phone call. "You shouldn't be alone anymore. We have the space. Come live with us." It had seemed like a blessing. Jason had co-signed the purchase of a spacious house in the suburbs, and Loretta, without hesitation, had offered to sell her apartment and contribute the proceeds to help with the down payment. It felt natural. She wasn't giving up anything, just helping her son build a future. The idea of living under one roof with a family again warmed her heart. She imagined helping with the grandchildren, cooking meals for the family, tending a garden like she used to. She pictured laughter in the kitchen, Sunday dinners, soft little feet running to her room in the mornings. It would be like a second chance at family life, a new beginning. The movers arrived shortly after 10. Loretta watched them load her belongings into the truck: a modest dresser, a few kitchen boxes, a worn armchair, and the most precious item of all, a hand-carved cedar chest that had belonged to her grandmother. She had packed it herself, lining it with family photographs, her late husband's watch, Jason's childhood drawings, and the embroidered baby blanket she had stitched decades ago. She placed it on the truck last, standing for a moment beside it, her hand resting on the wood. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for luck, but for peace. The drive to Jason and Ashley's house was quiet. Loretta rode in the passenger seat beside the driver, watching the city shrink away and the houses grow larger and farther apart. When they pulled into the driveway of the new house, Loretta blinked against the sun. The house was beautiful, a 2-story brick colonial with white shutters and a wide front porch. There was a maple tree in the front yard, its leaves turning the deep red of early autumn. A stone path wound through a freshly manicured lawn, leading to the front door where Ashley stood waiting, smiling. "Welcome, Loretta," she called out, stepping forward to greet her. Her hug was light, brief. Her perfume was sharp and floral, lingering in the air as Loretta stepped back. "Thank you, baby. It's good to be here," Loretta replied. Jason emerged from the garage, arms open. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with his father's steady eyes. He pulled his mother into a long hug, patting her back with affection. "You look great, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "We're so glad you're here." Inside, the house was everything Loretta imagined. Spacious, immaculate, filled with light and elegant furniture. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath the large windows, and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish. Ashley led her on a brief tour through the living room with its high ceilings and beige sectional, the open-concept kitchen with marble countertops, the dining room with a long oak table. She showed Loretta the guest bedroom on the main floor, a cozy space with soft blue walls, a queen-sized bed, and a window overlooking the backyard. "This will be your room," Ashley said, clasping her hands in front of her. "We thought it would be nice for you to be near everything. No stairs." "It's lovely," Loretta said sincerely, placing her suitcase gently on the bed. "Truly lovely." For the first few weeks, everything felt like a dream. Loretta rose early, as she always had, and made coffee before anyone else stirred. She cooked breakfast, helped pack lunches, and waited by the door to hug the children goodbye when they left for school. In the afternoons, she folded laundry, watered the potted plants, and made dinner before the family returned home. She never asked for anything. It felt good to be needed again, to be useful. Jason thanked her often, with a kiss on the cheek and a tired smile. Ashley complimented her meals. "So comforting, Loretta, thank you." Even the children, Kayla and Benjamin, seemed to enjoy having her around. Kayla liked to sit at the kitchen table and color while Loretta peeled potatoes. Benjamin, shy at first, began bringing her his favorite books to read before bed. In quiet moments, Loretta would sit on the back patio, a cup of tea in hand, watching the wind move through the trees. She felt safe here, surrounded by family. She imagined this was what retirement was supposed to feel like, a reward for all the years of sacrifice. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting ones, that gave her pause. Ashley's smiles sometimes didn't reach her eyes. Once, during a conversation about rearranging the living room, Ashley had said, "We want it to look cohesive, you know? Not like older furniture mixed in." Loretta had nodded politely, ignoring the implication. Another time, she had offered to pick up Kayla from ballet class only to be told, "It's okay, Loretta, you've done enough today." The words were gentle, but they lingered in her mind. She didn't speak of these things. She told herself not to overthink, not to create trouble where none existed. After all, she had been given a beautiful room, food, security, and the love of her family. She had everything she had ever hoped for. And yet, one evening, as she sat alone in her room folding laundry, she caught her reflection in the window and was struck by a sudden thought. I've traded one kind of solitude for another. But she brushed it aside. She was tired. Tomorrow would be better. And for a while it was. Until the small moments began to add up. Until the warmth of welcome began to cool. Until the soft rhythm of a shared home began to shift beneath her feet. Loretta didn't know it yet, but the life she had built around sacrifice was about to ask her for more than she had left to give. In the first few weeks, Loretta clung to the belief that she had done the right thing. The warm smiles, the small pleasantries, the polite thanks, these were her rewards. She moved through the house with a quiet grace, knowing where not to step, which drawers were hers to open, when to speak, and when to hold her tongue. She considered herself a guest, though she had sold the home she once owned and handed over the majority of her life savings to help Jason and Ashley buy this one. She told herself that being invisible in moments was simply a courtesy, a mark of humility, and not the beginning of something darker. But over time, the temperature of the house began to change, not physically, but atmospherically. Warmth gave way to formality. Where once Ashley had hugged her good morning, now she nodded, her face framed in the soft chill of politeness. The children, once so attached to Loretta's every word and story, now spoke to her with the distracted familiarity of routine, as though she were part of the wallpaper, there dependable but unnoticed. Ashley began to speak differently around her, as if addressing an employee rather than family. She would leave lists on the refrigerator. Kayla's ballet shoes need washing. Benjamin's lunch needs more protein. Try using olive oil instead of butter next time. There was no conversation, no shared planning, only instruction. And always with a smile. Always with the syrupy tone that dripped with false sweetness and unspoken expectations. At first, Loretta tried to dismiss it. Ashley was busy managing 2 children, a part-time design job, and her own ambitions. Perhaps she didn't mean anything by it. Perhaps the lists were her way of organizing her thoughts, not a dismissal of Loretta's judgment. But the feeling grew with each passing week. It was in the way Ashley moved around her, as if Loretta's presence were inconvenient. It was in how she corrected the way Loretta folded the towels. "I just like them rolled this way, more spa-like." It was in how she asked Loretta not to interrupt while she and Jason were speaking, even if Loretta had only meant to ask whether they'd be home for dinner. Jason remained largely absent. Work demanded long hours, and he often came home late, kissing his wife quickly and his children more slowly, but rarely sitting down long enough to notice the shift in atmosphere. When Loretta tried to speak with him about small things, the new neighbors, a book she was reading, a strange noise in the basement, he would nod distractedly, checking his phone, already half in tomorrow's meeting. "That's great, Mom," he'd say, not hearing what she said. "I'm glad you're settling in." In truth, Loretta was not settling in. She was settling down, shrinking herself to fit into smaller corners, avoiding the living room when Ashley had friends over, choosing to eat her meals early so she wouldn't intrude on the family's evening routine, making herself so useful during the day that no one could accuse her of being a burden. The grandchildren's behavior began to change too, not out of malice, but from the quiet cues children pick up when adults shift their tone. Kayla started leaving her laundry on Loretta's bed without asking. Benjamin would drop his dirty dishes in the sink with a vague, "Grandma'll get it." No one thanked her any more for the breakfast she made every morning, the dishes she washed, the floors she mopped. The family simply moved around her as if she were a part of the house itself. Then came the Sunday brunch. Ashley had invited a group of women from her yoga class. They arrived in a flurry of pastel dresses and oversized sunglasses, laughing loudly as they sipped mimosas in the garden. Loretta had spent the entire morning preparing. Mini quiches, fresh fruit, blueberry scones, and cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut just right. She wore her best blouse and styled her hair in soft curls, hoping to be part of the gathering, to feel included. But as the guests trickled in, Ashley pulled Loretta aside. "Would you mind keeping to the kitchen, Loretta? Just until everyone's settled in. Some of the women are new, and I'd like everything to feel seamless." Loretta blinked. "Of course," she said, her voice as smooth as she could manage. She stayed behind the kitchen counter, watching through the window as Ashley laughed with her guest, gesturing towards the spread Loretta had made, as though she were responsible for it all. Occasionally, one of the women would step inside, nod politely at Loretta without making eye contact, and take another plate outside. When Jason arrived home that afternoon, he kissed his wife and said, "Smells amazing in here." He didn't notice Loretta was already cleaning up, her back turned, wiping down the counter for the third time in silence. A few days later, Ashley sat across from Jason in the living room, her voice carrying easily through the thin walls. "I think it's time," she said. "Kayla's almost 9. She needs her own space. Benjamin's things are overflowing. We've talked about a playroom, and I really think it's time to make the shift." Loretta froze, the dish she was drying slipping from her hand and landing in the sink with a soft clatter. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. "Where would Mom go?" Jason asked, his voice hesitant. Ashley sighed. "The basement, of course. It's finished, it has a full bathroom, and it's quiet. She'd have privacy." "Isn't it a little cold down there?" he replied, his voice uncertain. "We can get a space heater. She doesn't even use the main living space much anymore. It makes sense. And I could finally have the home office I've needed for 2 years. I'm tired of working from the dining room." Jason didn't respond immediately. Then, "I guess we could ask her." Ashley's voice was cheerful, practiced. "It's not about asking, sweetheart. It's about what's best for the family." Loretta stood in the kitchen long after their voices faded, her hands resting on the edge of the sink, the towel limp between her fingers. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not pain, exactly, but a constriction, a holding in. She had felt it once before, the day she buried her husband. That same tightening of the world, the shrinking of options, the quiet ushering of life into smaller, darker spaces. She didn't mention the conversation that evening. Instead, she cooked dinner, chicken stew with dumplings, Ashley's favorite. She set the table with care, lit candles, poured wine. She served them with a smile and sat at the corner of the table, as always, listening to the children chatter and Jason murmur something about work. And when Ashley said, "We were thinking, maybe you'd be more comfortable in the downstairs guest suite," Loretta nodded before the question had even ended. "Of course," she said, "whatever's best." Ashley beamed. "Wonderful. I'll start clearing out the closet tomorrow." Jason reached for his wine glass and smiled vaguely in Loretta's direction. "Thanks, Mom. It really does make things easier." Loretta nodded again, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her food grew cold on the plate. That night, in the small bedroom she would soon leave, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The curtains she had sewn herself, the framed photo of Jason as a toddler, the lamp she had bought at a flea market in her 20s. All of it would go with her, of course, but the sense of place, of belonging, would not. That would remain upstairs, locked in the bright rooms of those who no longer saw her as anything but a fixture. She pressed her hand against her chest, felt the steady thump of her own heart, and whispered a reminder to herself. "You are still here." But deep down, she already knew. She was being moved, down, away, beneath. Not because of space, not because of practicality, because she no longer fit into the picture they wanted to paint, because she reminded them of things they didn't want to see: sacrifice, age, skin, servitude. And now they wanted her out of the frame entirely. The weekend came without fanfare. The weather had turned unseasonably cool, and the overcast sky mirrored the dull ache in Loretta's chest. She had spent the days leading up to the move in quiet preparation, carefully packing her things while trying to suppress the grief that clung to each gesture. Ashley had already begun moving boxes into the room that had once been hers, speaking in a chirpy tone about the new office setup. Jason offered to help carry her furniture downstairs, but his movements were hurried, distracted, more like fulfilling an obligation than helping his mother transition into a new space. The basement had once been used for storage, a place where seasonal decorations, outgrown baby items, and boxes of old college textbooks sat gathering dust. The guest room in the basement was technically finished. It had drywall, a small bathroom, and a window high on the wall that let in a sliver of light, but it bore none of the warmth or intention of a lived-in space. The walls were painted a washed-out beige, and the ceiling hung low enough to make Loretta feel like she had to stoop. The air smelled faintly of concrete and something older, something forgotten. As Jason lowered her cedar chest onto the thin carpet, he wiped his hands on his jeans and gave her a forced smile. There we go. All set. Loretta looked around. The bed barely fit against the far wall. Her dresser was tucked awkwardly in the corner beside the door, and her reading chair had been left upstairs because there simply wasn't room for it here. There was a shelf near the window where she placed her family photos and the small plant Kayla had given her on her last birthday. The space felt temporary, as if she were a guest in her own life. Ashley appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. It just needs a little sprucing up, maybe a rug or some curtains. I'm sure you'll make it cozy. Loretta nodded, the muscles in her neck stiff from holding herself upright. I'm sure I will. They left her alone shortly after, retreating upstairs, where their voices soon resumed their normal volume, muffled but distinct above her. Loretta stood in the middle of the room for a long while, unsure of where to begin. The small window offered little natural light, casting long, bluish shadows that stretched across the bed. She turned on the overhead light, a harsh, buzzing fixture that made the room feel more like a basement than ever, and sat slowly on the edge of the bed. It creaked beneath her, the mattress too soft, as if even it had given up holding her weight. She looked around, taking in the view. The silver pipe that ran along the ceiling, the exposed air vents, the humming of the furnace kicking on somewhere behind the wall. This would be her world now. A room under the house, out of sight, out of mind. Over the following days, Loretta tried to maintain her routine. She rose early, quietly climbed the stairs, and began breakfast before anyone else stirred. She made pancakes on Saturdays, as she always had, carefully measuring the batter, adding a touch of cinnamon the way Benjamin liked. She laid out plates of food, poured juice, and filled thermoses. No one commented. Jason would murmur a tired, "Thanks, Mom," on his way to the door, barely glancing at her. Ashley often grabbed a protein bar instead, muttering something about Pilates or errands. The children would eat and rush out, never once asking why Grandma no longer sat at the table with them. When the dishwasher broke, Loretta washed the dishes by hand. When the laundry piled up, she sorted and folded it without being asked. She changed the sheets, vacuumed the rugs, scrubbed the bathtub, and even repotted the dying ficus in the living room. She tried to take pride in these tasks, telling herself she was helping, contributing. But there was no acknowledgement, no recognition, only a quiet expectation that these things would simply be done. Evenings were the hardest. She would retreat to the basement after dinner, the sounds of the family drifting down like echoes from another world. Laughter, television, the ping of phone notifications, footsteps moving freely through rooms she no longer entered. Loretta would sit on her bed, her hands in her lap, listening. Sometimes she would try to read, but the light was too harsh. Sometimes she would watch the shadows on the ceiling and imagine they were dancing. Mostly, she sat in silence. When holidays approached, Ashley began planning her annual dinner party, a gathering of colleagues and friends. Loretta had hosted holidays her entire life. Thanksgiving turkeys, Christmas hams, Easter roasts. She had the timing down to a science. She knew how to set a table for 12, how to fold napkins like tulips, how to create warmth from nothing. She offered to help, her voice steady and kind. Ashley smiled politely. "Oh, no need. We're going a different direction this year. More modern. I've got it handled." But Loretta still spent the day cooking, preparing side dishes just in case, making sure there was enough wine, enough ice, enough warmth in the house. She wore her best dress, brushed her hair back with care, and waited upstairs to greet the guests. Ashley intercepted her by the stairs. "Loretta, I was thinking maybe you'd be more comfortable downstairs tonight. It's just with the noise and the crowd." Loretta blinked. "I made the sweet potatoes you like." Ashley didn't meet her eyes. "Yes, thank you. That was so thoughtful." Loretta descended the stairs slowly, the tray of sweet potatoes in her hands, and placed them on the bottom step. She didn't want to intrude. From her room, she could hear the party unfold above her. Clinking glasses, laughter, someone playing music on their phone. She sat in her room and stared at the blank wall, the echoes pressing down on her like stones. Her body began to ache in new ways. Her knees throbbed in the cold. Her back stiffened in the mornings. She mentioned once, casually, that the basement was chilly. "I'll check the vents," Jason said, flipping through his phone. He never did. Loretta used the last of her savings to buy a small space heater. She placed it near the foot of her bed, watching the coils glow orange in the dim room. The warmth it gave off was minimal but symbolic, one small corner of comfort she could control. When Christmas came, Loretta wrapped gifts for the grandchildren in silver paper and tied them with ribbons she had saved from years past. She baked cookies and filled jars with cocoa mix and mini marshmallows. Ashley rearranged the decorations Loretta had put up, murmuring something about a more cohesive color scheme. On Christmas morning, Loretta came upstairs with her gifts, only to find that the family had already opened theirs. Wrapping paper littered the floor. Benjamin was playing with a remote control car. Kayla was scrolling on her new tablet. "Oh, we thought you were still asleep," Ashley said with a shrug. Loretta smiled. "Merry Christmas." She handed out her gifts, and the children accepted them without enthusiasm, already overwhelmed by newer, flashier things. Jason offered her coffee, but there was no seat for her on the couch. She sat on the floor beside the tree, her legs tucked beneath her, and watched them all move around her as if she were made of glass. Later that day, Ashley handed her a load of laundry and asked if she could take care of it when you get a chance. Loretta nodded and carried the basket back down to the basement, her knees aching with every step. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow, not because of the gifts or the decorations, but because of what the day had revealed. She had become the help, the maid, the cook. She had poured her love into this family, and they had sipped it carelessly, never pausing to wonder where it came from or whether the well might one day run dry. She was no longer a part of the family. She was an accessory, a convenience. The final crack came one rainy afternoon in February. Loretta had gone upstairs to bring in the laundry before the storm rolled in. Ashley's laptop was open on the bed, and a document was displayed on the screen, a renovation plan. Loretta hadn't meant to look, but her name was like a siren. She stepped closer, squinting. The plans showed the basement being converted into a full gym and entertainment suite. New flooring, modern lighting, soundproofing. There was no mention of a bedroom, no space set aside for her, no trace. She noticed the date in the corner, 3 years in the future. They were already planning a life without her in it. With trembling hands, Loretta turned off the screen and backed out of the room. She carried the laundry down in silence and folded it with mechanical precision. That night, as she sat in her room listening to the rain against the tiny basement window, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. They were waiting for her to disappear. Quietly, gratefully. She would not give them the satisfaction. Not yet. Not ever. The morning after the rain, Loretta awoke in the basement with a heaviness that felt different from her usual aches. The shift was subtle, yet profound, like a seam inside her had come undone during the night. She stared at the ceiling for a long time before rising. The small heater in the corner buzzed gently, casting an orange glow across the room, but it could not chase away the chill in her bones. She dressed slowly, her movements deliberate, as though testing each limb, each thought, for signs of weakness. But there was none. Only clarity. And an undercurrent of something else. Anger, perhaps, or maybe something older, something deeper, something more resilient. The house was quiet when she emerged from the basement. She brewed coffee, moving through the kitchen with practiced ease. She cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them with a pinch of salt, and laid strips of bacon into a pan. The ritual soothed her, anchoring her mind to something familiar while her thoughts spun around what she had seen the day before. She could still picture the glowing laptop screen, the architectural renderings, the clean lines of the redesigned basement, her basement, transformed into a space of leisure, her presence erased without ceremony. Ashley appeared first, her hair tucked under a sleek headband, leggings clinging to her thin frame. She smiled absently and poured herself a green smoothie without acknowledging the breakfast on the stove. "Morning," she muttered. Loretta nodded. "Morning." Jason followed, dressed for work, tie half knotted, phone in hand. He grunted a greeting and reached for a mug. Loretta placed a plate in front of him, filled with eggs, toast, and bacon, just the way he liked. "Thanks, Mom," he said, not looking up. She watched them move around her, operating on autopilot, taking without noticing. It struck her then how seamless her invisibility had become. She had folded into their lives so thoroughly that her efforts were indistinguishable from the furniture, the appliances, the water from the tap. She didn't confront them that morning. There was no scene, no tears. Instead, she made her quiet preparations. When Jason left for work and Ashley retreated to her new home office, formerly Loretta's bedroom, Loretta put on her coat and stepped out into the cold. The bus ride downtown was long and slow, but she didn't mind. She hadn't been into the city center in months, maybe years, and the movement through streets and neighborhoods felt like a return to herself. The sights outside the window were familiar in the way a childhood street remains etched in memory. Corner stores, faded murals, the church she once attended with Jason when he was small. It was a strange thing to realize how far she had traveled only by staying in place. She stepped off the bus near the bank where she had opened her account years ago. The lobby was warm and modern, filled with the hum of soft music and low conversations. A young woman in a blue blazer greeted her at the desk. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to speak with someone about a property loan," Loretta said, her voice steady. "It's regarding a home I contributed to financially. I believe my name is on the paperwork." She was led to an office with glass walls where a woman named Melissa introduced herself with a professional smile and a firm handshake. Loretta explained her situation, choosing her words carefully, as if unspooling a long thread. She spoke of selling her home, given the money to help her son and daughter-in-law purchase their new house, of signing papers she hadn't fully understood at the time, trusting that her contribution would be respected. Melissa listened attentively, occasionally typing into her computer or flipping through digital documents. Finally, she looked up. "It looks like you're listed as a party to the initial down payment agreement. The funds were registered as a non-interest-bearing loan, with a provision that grants you a 30% ownership stake in the property, provided you reside there." Loretta sat back in the chair, absorbing the words. She was not a guest. She was not living on kindness or charity. She was an owner. "If I were to move out?" she asked. "The agreement states that if you were to vacate the property voluntarily, the balance of your stake would need to be resolved, either through a buyout or by selling the property and distributing the proceeds accordingly." Loretta nodded slowly. "Thank you. Would you like to open a personal account in your name?" Melissa offered. "We can ensure all future transactions related to this arrangement are recorded securely and confidentially." "Yes," Loretta said, "I'd like that." By the time she left the bank, she was trembling, not from fear or cold, but from the sheer force of standing up straight again. She walked to a nearby cafe, one she used to visit after Sunday church, and found a small table by the window. She ordered a sandwich and a cup of tea, the act feeling luxurious in its simplicity. She opened the folder of documents Melissa had printed for her and began reviewing them line by line, highlighting phrases, circling numbers. She was no longer just a mother, or a helper, or a name buried in a legal form. She was a woman with equity, with agency, with rights, and she would no longer allow herself to be erased. On her way home, she passed the community center. A bulletin board stood just outside the main doors, cluttered with colorful flyers. One caught her eye, a weekly writing group for women over 60. "Your story matters," it read. "No experience necessary." Loretta tore off a tab with the contact number and tucked it into her coat pocket. That evening, when she returned to the house, nothing had changed on the surface. The children were doing homework, Ashley was typing at her laptop, and Jason was fixing a leaky faucet in the powder room. Loretta moved through the familiar motions, warming leftovers, checking backpacks, folding laundry, but her mind was elsewhere. In the quiet of the basement, she sat at her small desk and began to write. Her hand moved slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. She wrote about the sound of pipes in the walls, the cold that crept into her bones, the silence of being unseen. She wrote about the renovation plans, the forgotten meals, the way her own name had vanished from every conversation upstairs. She wrote until her hand cramped, then sat back and exhaled. The room was no warmer, the walls no brighter, but something inside her had shifted. She was building something now, a record, a voice. The next day, she called the number on the flyer and signed up for the writing group. Over the next few weeks, she attended each meeting faithfully. The group was small, 6 women, all with gray in their hair and stories etched into their faces. They met in a quiet room with big windows and a long table where pens, notebooks, and mugs of tea waited. Each session began with a prompt, followed by 30 minutes of silent writing, and then, for those who wanted, a chance to share. Loretta shared her work on the 3rd week. She read about the basement. The women listened without interruption. When she finished, there was a silence that felt reverent. One woman reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not alone," she said. The group leader asked if she would submit the piece to the local paper's community column. Loretta hesitated, then agreed. 2 weeks later, her story appeared in print, accompanied by a sketch of a staircase leading down. The title, Underneath. It was a beginning. The piece drew attention. Letters to the editor appeared, responses from other women, from daughters, from mothers. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others asked how she had found the courage to speak. Ashley found the article one afternoon, folded neatly in the mailbox. Jason brought it to Loretta. "Is this about us?" he asked, standing in the basement doorway, his expression unreadable. Loretta met his gaze evenly. "It's about me." He didn't respond, just turned and walked back upstairs. But that night, he lingered a little longer in the kitchen. He asked how her day had been. He listened when she answered. He even said thank you when she passed him the salt. Small changes, barely visible, but enough. Loretta didn't need an apology, not right away. What she needed was her own space, her own name, her own plan. She was no longer waiting to be invited into a life that had already written her out. She was ready to write a new one, and this time the pen was in her hand. The morning after her piece was published, Loretta woke with a peculiar sensation in her chest. Not dread, not anxiety, but a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The kind of weightlessness that came, perhaps, not from the absence of burden, but from knowing one's burden had finally been named, acknowledged, and no longer had to be carried alone. Sunlight bled through the narrow window near the ceiling of her basement room, and for once she didn't resent its slant or its meagerness. She stared at the ceiling for several minutes before getting out of bed, letting herself simply be. Instead of going straight upstairs, she dressed in the nicest clothes she owned that hadn't been worn in years. A pale blue blouse and a pair of dark slacks she had purchased once for church, but had since buried in the back of the closet. She applied a touch of lipstick, brushed her hair into a soft twist, and, for the first time in months, looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw more than someone's mother or someone's help. She saw a woman with purpose. In the kitchen, she left a note. Gone out for the day, cereals in the pantry, Loretta. She didn't make coffee or fry bacon. She didn't pre-cut fruit or defrost chicken or organize the children's school bags. She slipped out the front door as quietly as the wind and headed to the bus stop with her handbag clutched tight and her heart beating like a drum. On the ride into town, she stared out the window, her eyes roaming freely across the streets, buildings, and passers-by as if seeing the city for the first time in decades. It wasn't so much the scenery that moved her, but the feeling of motion, of being carried forward without tether, without expectation. Her hand rested lightly on her bag, inside of which were the documents from the bank, a copy of her article, and a notebook with several newly scribbled entries. Each page felt like a breath, a piece of her voice retrieved from wherever she had hidden it. Her first stop was the library. The main branch downtown stood like an old friend waiting at a crossroads, its brick exterior softened by ivy and time. Inside, she found the reading room nearly empty, the morning hours still quiet. She walked through the aisles slowly, grazing her fingers along the spines of books, reacquainting herself with the feeling of choosing something just for her. She pulled down a collection of essays by black women writers, their titles bold and names familiar, voices that had once kept her company in the evenings after long shifts, voices she hadn't allowed herself to revisit in too long. She spent 2 hours reading, scribbling quotes into her notebook, nodding silently to herself when certain phrases struck home. When noon came, she gathered her things and walked to a nearby cafe, a small, cozy place tucked between a florist and a laundromat. She ordered a turkey sandwich, a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window watching pedestrians hurry past. The food was simple, the tea warm, and the moment precious in its ordinariness. She didn't have to rush back to start dinner, to vacuum, to help with homework. No one was waiting on her. The freedom was unsettling in its newness, but exhilarating too. She felt as though she had stepped into someone else's life, a quieter, freer one, and was slowly realizing it could be her own. After lunch, she returned to the community center, where the writing group met every Thursday. Though it wasn't a meeting day, she asked if she could use one of the empty rooms to write. The receptionist gave her a kind smile and led her to a small room with a round table and large windows facing a narrow garden. Loretta sat and wrote for hours. She wrote about the box in her chest filled with memories she couldn't explain to anyone in the house above her. She wrote about motherhood, about silence, about the ache of being helpful to the point of invisibility. She wrote about being dismissed not through cruelty, but through persistent disregard. And as she wrote, she felt something unfurl within her, something long tangled and coiled begin to stretch and breathe. Later that afternoon, she did something unexpected. She walked to Lakeside Haven, a senior living community she had passed countless times on the bus, but had never entered. She didn't intend to stop, but her feet carried her forward. She paused at the entrance, her hand hovering near the glass door, her breath catching. Then she stepped inside. The lobby was bright and airy, with tall ceilings and wide windows that let the light flood in. There were couches arranged in welcoming circles, fresh flowers on the tables, and soft jazz playing in the background. The air smelled of lemon and old wood, clean, comforting, familiar. A woman at the front desk greeted her warmly. "I was just curious," Loretta said. "I'm not sure I belong here yet." "Curious is a great place to start," the woman replied and handed her a brochure. "We offer tours every day. Would you like to see the place?" Loretta hesitated only a second. Yes, I would." She was led through hallways with bright artwork on the walls, into a library, a craft room, a small auditorium, a sunroom with rocking chairs facing the lake. They passed a dining hall filled with people chatting, reading, playing cards. The energy was calm but vibrant, not like a nursing home but a campus, a sanctuary. They paused at one of the model apartments, a one-bedroom unit with a kitchenette, a wide window with a view of the water, and a sitting area just big enough for a reading chair and a small table. It was modest, but it was enough. It was hers if she wanted it. She asked about cost, about payment plans. The numbers made her stomach twist until she remembered the documents in her bag. The bank had confirmed she owned 30% of the house she lived in. If she chose to sell her share or force a buyout, she could afford this. Maybe not with luxury, but with dignity. She left the tour feeling breathless, overwhelmed, and more alive than she had in years. Outside, the sky was tinged with the pink of early evening, and the lake shimmered softly behind the trees. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind graze her cheeks. She'd come with no plans, no vision, no certainty, and yet here she was, holding a map to a life that didn't require silence or servitude. When she arrived home, it was after dark. Jason met her at the door, his expression caught between worry and annoyance. "Where have you been?" he asked. "We've been trying to call." "I went out," Loretta said, hanging her coat carefully. "I left a note." "Well, we didn't know when you'd be back. The kids were asking for you." "I'm sure they managed," she said gently, moving past him. Ashley was in the kitchen, a smoothie in her hand, her eyes narrowed. "We had plans to go over summer vacation dates tonight." Loretta turned to her calmly. "You still can. I don't need to be involved in that." Ashley blinked, momentarily thrown. Jason stepped forward. "Did something happen today, Mom?" "Yes," Loretta said. "I thought about what I want." The words hung in the air like bells, clear, resonant. That night, she didn't go down to the basement immediately. She stayed upstairs, sitting at the dining room table long after the others had retreated to their rooms. She took out her notebook and wrote again. This time her words were declarations, not reflections. "I want a space of my own. I want warmth and quiet and respect. I want to be seen, not used. I want to live, not survive." She turned off the lights herself, descended the stairs with unhurried grace, and slipped into the small room that had been her cage, and now, she knew, would soon be nothing more than a chapter. She was no longer waiting for permission to change her life. She had stepped into the world and found it waiting. And she had not flinched. The house seemed quieter than usual in the days that followed, though it wasn't because anyone had spoken less. The routines remained the same. Ashley came and went with her measured grace. Jason buried himself in work. The children darted between school, activities, and their screens. But Loretta noticed a subtle change, like the stillness that settles before a summer storm. Her quiet withdrawal from their everyday demands had not gone unnoticed. Her absence at the dinner table, her reluctance to run errands, and her rare but firm refusals to accommodate last-minute favors all created small ripples on the surface of a family that had grown too used to the smooth waters of her compliance. No one confronted her directly. Instead, there were long glances, quiet whispers, the occasional stilted question about her plans for the day. Ashley's tone had grown cooler, her comments edged with sarcasm so thinly veiled that it might have passed for humor had Loretta still been willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. Jason, though more subtle, had taken to watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. His eyes not angry, but confused, like a man who had misplaced something and couldn't quite name what it was. The pressure came to a head one Thursday evening after dinner. The children had gone to bed early, and Loretta was sitting in the living room reading an article about elder financial independence. She heard their voices from the kitchen, Jason's low and uncertain, Ashley's clipped and firm. "She's acting different," Ashley said, her voice barely hushed. "She's pulling away. And the article, that article, was about us. Don't pretend it wasn't." "I don't know," Jason replied. "She said it was about her." "Please," Ashley snorted. "The basement, the silence, the being used. She might as well have put our names on it." "Well, she's not wrong," Jason said after a pause. Loretta froze. Ashley gasped. "Excuse me?" "She's not wrong," he repeated, slower this time. "We've depended on her more than we should have. I didn't even realize." Ashley cut him off. "Oh, don't turn this into a guilt trip. She's lived here rent-free for years. She's had a place to stay, food, access to the kids. What more does she want? She helped pay for the house, Jason said. Ashley fell silent. Then, in a voice sharp as ice, she muttered, "And now she wants to take it back." The words struck Loretta like a slap. She closed the laptop gently and stood. Her legs were steady, but her heart pounded. She walked to the kitchen doorway and stood there, watching them. They hadn't noticed her approach. "I do," she said simply. Ashley turned, startled. Jason looked up, his eyes wide. Loretta stepped fully into the room. "I do want to take it back. Not because I want revenge, not to punish, but because it's mine. Because I'm done living in a space where I don't exist unless I'm needed." Ashley opened her mouth, but Loretta raised a hand. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've spoken to the bank. I've read the agreement. I know what I contributed and what that means legally. But more importantly, I know what I deserve." Jason's mouth opened and closed again. "Mom, I'm moving out," she said. "I've put down a deposit at Lakeside Haven. I'll be moving in 3 weeks." The silence that followed felt as dense as smoke. Ashley recovered first. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "You're just going to leave? After everything we've done for you?" Loretta turned to her. "Everything you've done for me?" Her voice trembled now, but not from weakness. "Ashley, I gave up my home. I gave you my savings. I helped raise your children. I've cooked, cleaned, folded your laundry, organized your life, while you pretended I was a burden." Jason stepped forward. "Mom, that's not fair." "No," she said, her voice steady now. "What's not fair is pretending I don't matter unless I'm serving you. What's not fair is building renovation plans that erase me from this house. What's not fair is celebrating holidays without including me, eating the meals I made, then shooing me back downstairs like I'm the help." Ashley crossed her arms. "So what? You're going to force us to sell the house?" Loretta looked at her son. "I'm going to ask that you buy out my share. If you can't, then yes, the house will have to be sold." Jason paled. "That'll be hard to afford. We're not prepared for that." Loretta's expression softened, but she didn't bend. "I wasn't prepared to be put in the basement. I wasn't prepared to be forgotten. And yet, here we are." Ashley scoffed. "This is selfish. You're tearing this family apart because your feelings are hurt." Loretta felt the sting, but didn't flinch. "No, I'm saving myself before I disappear entirely." Jason sat down heavily at the table, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, I don't want you to go." "I know," she said gently, "but you didn't want me to stay either, not really, not as myself, just as someone who made your life easier." The hours that followed were filled with heated words, tears, long silences. Jason cycled through frustration, denial, bargaining, and finally, a quiet kind of sorrow. Ashley kept her tone hard, but Loretta saw the flicker of fear beneath it. The fear of losing control, of facing a life without a free laborer in the basement. Loretta didn't gloat, didn't rage. She was firm, but not cruel. She spoke clearly from a place of long-held pain that had finally found the courage to surface. Eventually, the conversation ended in quiet resignation. Jason agreed to speak with the bank, to explore options. Ashley said nothing, but left the room abruptly. Loretta stood in the kitchen long after they had gone, the clock ticking above the stove, the dishwasher humming. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, her hands trembling now that the moment had passed. It hadn't been easy. It wouldn't get easier. but something had cracked open, and the air that rushed in felt new and clean. Downstairs, in the basement room that was still technically hers, she sat on the bed and looked around. The boxes would come soon. The photos would be packed. The heater would be unplugged. But for now, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had done. She had said no. She had drawn a line, and that line would lead her out the door, into the life she was choosing, finally, for herself. The final weeks in the house unfolded in a strange and delicate balance of tension and necessity. There was no more fighting, no more confrontation. After the initial shock of Loretta's announcement passed, Jason had shifted into a state of quiet logistics, spending long evenings on the phone with real estate agents and financial consultants, reviewing documents and running numbers. He never said so, but Loretta could see it in the way he carried himself. Slower, shoulders bowed under the weight of guilt and realization. He had not protested again. Instead, he moved through the tasks she had made unavoidable, eyes fixed on the future she had chosen for herself. Ashley, for her part, adopted a brittle kind of civility. She spoke to Loretta only when necessary, her voice clipped but controlled. The house she had envisioned molding in her image was now once again up for negotiation. The renovation plans that had once represented her quiet dominion were shelved. There was no talk of a home gym anymore, no browsing Pinterest boards for tile samples. It wasn't open warfare. It was something colder. A silence that no longer demanded Loretta's compliance, but refused to acknowledge her presence altogether. Loretta noticed, but she did not dwell. Her focus was on the days ahead. Each morning, she woke early, as always, but no longer to prepare breakfast. Instead, she took long walks around the neighborhood, feeling the spring edge into the air. The trees had begun to bud again. Tulips pushed their bright heads through the soil in front yards. There was something comforting about nature's disregard for the drama of human households, its insistence on blooming, on cycling forward. She spent her afternoons carefully sorting her belongings. She chose only what mattered: her grandmother's writing desk, the cedar chest that had once held her son's baby clothes, a few framed photographs, the armchair she'd restored by hand 10 years ago. There wasn't room for much in her new apartment, but that suited her. She didn't want to carry the weight of this house with her, just the pieces that had always belonged solely to her. The grandchildren reacted in their own ways. Benjamin, still young enough to view the world in simple terms, was mostly concerned with logistics. "Who's going to make my lunch now?" he asked one afternoon, frowning as he bit into a soggy sandwich Ashley had packed. Loretta smiled and patted his head. "Your mama will, but I'll teach her the secret to my sandwich before I go." "Can I visit you?" he asked. "Will you still have snacks?" "I'll always have snacks," she promised. Kayla was more observant, more cautious. She had always watched with eyes that saw more than adults expected. "They shouldn't have put you in the basement," she said quietly one day, helping Loretta wrap a ceramic vase in newspaper. Loretta paused and looked at her granddaughter, touched by the honesty. "Sometimes grown-ups make poor choices," she said softly, "but we can all learn to do better." "Will I still get to see you?" Kayla asked. "Of course," Loretta said. "My door will always be open." The night before her move, the house was unusually still. Loretta sat in her nearly bare room, surrounded by boxes and memories. The heater hummed softly, casting its usual golden light on the walls. But this time it didn't feel like she was retreating into the basement. It felt like she was preparing to rise. A soft knock came at the door. Jason entered without waiting for a reply. He stood awkwardly near the bed, holding a small suitcase she recognized from her own closet. He must have used it for some work trip years ago. "I packed a few things to help you tomorrow," he said, placing it on the floor. "Some towels, soap, little things." "Thank you," she said. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees. They sat in silence for a while, the way they used to on the porch of their old home when he was a boy, just watching the world. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about how we treated you. I didn't see it, Mom. I really didn't. Or maybe I didn't want to." Loretta didn't respond, allowing him space. "I've always thought of you as the strongest person I know," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot that being strong doesn't mean being silent. It doesn't mean being invisible." She turned to him then, and her voice was warm but resolute. "You're my son. I would have walked through fire for you. I still would. But there's a difference between loving someone and letting yourself disappear for them." "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked. "Dad would be ashamed of me." "No," she said gently. "He would understand. What matters is that you learn and change." "I want to," Jason whispered. "I want the kids to understand what family really means. Not just obligation, but respect, dignity." "I want that too," she said. The next morning, Loretta rose before dawn. She dressed in the cornflower blue dress Frank had always loved, put on the pearl necklace he'd given her for their 30th anniversary, and stepped out into the early light. Jason helped carry her last suitcase. Marcus, her friend from the writing group, met her outside with a warm smile in his old sedan. Ashley stood by the door, arms crossed. She said nothing but accepted the cookbook Loretta handed her, a handwritten collection of family recipes. "For Mason's lunches," Loretta said simply. Ashley nodded, and her voice, for once, was almost sincere. "Thank you." They didn't hug. Loretta didn't expect it. The grandchildren clung to her, tears in their eyes. She kissed their cheeks and whispered promises of visits, of sleepovers, of cookies and bedtime stories. She gave Benjamin a set of watercolor pencils. She handed Kayla a vintage jewelry box that had once belonged to her own mother. To Jason, she gave a photograph. It was one he hadn't seen in years. Him as a child, sitting on Frank's lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. "Don't forget who you were," she said. And then she stepped into the car. Lakeside Haven was everything she remembered. The apartment was modest but bright, with wide windows that filled the room with sunlight. Her desk fit perfectly by the window, her chair nestled beside it like it had always belonged there. Marcus helped hang the photographs. The cedar chest sat at the foot of her bed. There was no basement, no steps to climb, no corners to hide in. By afternoon, she was settled. The sun poured in like a benediction. She brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the lake. Her notebook was open on the desk, her pen ready. She didn't feel lonely. She felt whole. Over the weeks that followed, she found herself falling into a new rhythm. She joined the community book club. She taught Kayla how to paint with watercolors during her weekend visits. She walked with Marcus around the lake in the early mornings and attended writing workshops at the center. She submitted another essay to the paper. They published it with a short note. By popular request, another piece from Loretta James. One afternoon, a letter arrived in her mailbox from Jason. It wasn't long, but it was honest. He told her that he had started therapy, that he was beginning to understand patterns, expectations, the weight he had carried and passed on without realizing. He didn't ask her to come back. He didn't beg forgiveness. He just wrote, Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to be better." And that, Loretta thought, was enough. The lake outside her window shimmered. The wind moved gently through the trees. The chair beneath her creaked with familiarity. She picked up her pen and began to write. Not about what she had lost, but about everything she had found. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for more powerful stories like this one, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.